We're starting a new topic today. We've finished everything really for families and households, and you've done a little bit of revision using Seneca. So now we're doing a section called just theory. So this is where we look at all the different theories in a lot more detail than what we already have, and more generally, so we're not just applying it to a specific topic like education or families or crime. We're looking at it more broadly. Within this topic, there are some debate questions, and I'm going to start off with us looking at the first debate question, which is sociology as a science. Is it a science? Should it be a science? So why would sociology want to be considered a science? So science is seen as obviously a prestigious subject, and obviously if you're associated with science, ultimately your subject is going to be seen as better. It's often why psychology degrees have BSc. They want to be in the scientific category rather than the BA category at university. Scientific knowledge is seen as superior to other forms of knowledge because of its rigorous methods, so those methods that are high in reliability. Why should sociology be as a science? Arguably, when sociology first came about, it was all about prestige, trying to get sociology on the map. It was a new subject, people didn't really know what it was, so trying to find something that would make it seem more prestigious and worthwhile. Academic status, so the same status as the natural science. Why consider one to be better than the other? They're both trying to explore phenomena in a scientific manner, so why not consider it a science? You'd get more funding as well. Generally, if you can show that your research is scientific, you're more likely to attract funding from lots of organisations, not just government, but maybe from think tanks and businesses as well. So sociologists are divided about whether it should be a science. Some say that it definitely is a science because of its rigorous methods, and some say that it isn't because it can't be as scientific, it can't be always high in reliability. Others say that actually it shouldn't even want to be a science. It's not really a question that we should try to become scientific, and it's separate to natural sciences. But that doesn't make it less valuable. It's just a different way of understanding the world. So the 5 key features of science, if we want to determine whether it is a science and whether it should be a science, we need to first understand what science is. So the first key feature is empirical. So this is another way of saying knowable through our senses. Knowledge is observable and can be quantified. The second, is it testable? So can that empirical knowledge that we can see through our senses, can it be tested? So it can either be verified as true or refuted as false. If you can't test something, there's no way of proving it right or wrong, then perhaps it's not scientific. We're going to look at a thinker called Karl Popper, who argues that empirical knowledge can be put through a test of falsification to see if something is false. And if you can test something through falsification, then it is scientific. Don't worry if you don't know what falsification is, we're going to look at that in a minute. Number 3, theoretical. So does it aim to uncover causal relationships, one thing causing another? 4, is it cumulative? So scientific theory builds on previous knowledge and moves forward our understanding of a particular concept or idea or thing. And finally, it's objective. So science is value-free. There are no personal prejudices. So your own personal opinion doesn't affect the science. So what I'd like you to do is think of a sociological study that you know well. So you might want to do, for example, Rosenthal and Jacobson, the Pygmalion in the classroom study. Think about, can you test, was it a testable study? Was it objective? Did the researchers' values affect the research? And think about, does it meet this criteria? Could you describe that study as scientific? So positivists are the branch of sociology that say that sociology is a science. So Comte is the founder of positivist sociology, and he was aiming for this science of society. He thought that you could find social laws or rules about our society in the same way that you can find rules about the natural world. So the natural physical world has objective facts that are external to individuals, and they're waiting for us to discover them. And he was saying that social behaviour is also governed by underlying causal laws, and therefore our behaviour can be predictable. And once we uncover these laws, we will be able to predict the behaviour of humans in the same way that if you uncover laws of natural sciences, you can predict how things in the natural world will behave. So what are the key features of positivism? Firstly, they aim to uncover causal relationships. So we should be able to say that certain things cause other things. So for example, poor socialization causes underachievement. Research should be objective and not influenced by the researcher's own values and opinions. So the researcher needs to maintain a detached approach to their research. The findings should be reliable. So if we're uncovering laws of society, they should not change each time we measure them. They should remain the same, and the same outcomes occur. And then finally, a high level of control in research to minimise the effect of other factors on not being studied. If I'm looking at, for that same example, poor socialisation and underachievement, I should be able to control all of the other factors that might cause underachievement in my study in order to make it scientific. So the opposite then is interpretivism. So this is the branch that says that sociology is not a science. So it's, as I said, the complete opposite, and is associated with Weber. Weber says that sociology should study society from the perspective of other people. So he was keen on, us placing ourselves in the shoes of those that we are trying to understand. And he calls this Verstehen. So it's that German word. We should know this. We covered it when we did research methods. So it's subjective, it's not objective, it's the opposite. And as science is strongly objective, we can't really say that sociology is a science. So Karl Popper thought that all academic subject areas that wanted to be called a science should subject themselves to what's known as falsification. So to test itself, sociology must come up with testable hypotheses. For example, Durkheim did a study on suicide, and he believed that suicide was caused by insufficient regulation and integration into society. And what Karl Popper is saying is, can you test that? Can you test it to prove it right or wrong? If you can't come up with a test like that, then it's not scientific. He particularly talks about Marxism as being a pseudoscience because its concepts like false class consciousness are too abstract to be seen and measured. So essentially, Popper is saying that sociology can be a science if it can prove that it can come up with a test of falsification. But if it can't, then it's not scientific. So falsification can only occur in open societies. Closed societies prevent falsification from occurring. So if you think about Galileo, so he was talking about how the Earth actually revolves around the sun, but he was saying this at a time when society was very religious, and they completely rejected. They actually said that he was a heretic for suggesting that the Earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way around. So falsification can only happen in a society where there is an open debate and discussion. And Popper wasn't saying that ideas that can't be falsified are useless. Things like false class consciousness are still useful for our understanding of society. They're just not scientific. So if you could click on the link and have a go answering those questions, it just gives a bit more detail about what he says about Marxism and falsification. So the next key thinker is Thomas Kuhn. He kind of sits on the fence about whether sociology is a science. He thinks that it sort of is and isn't. So he came up with this idea of a sort of cycle of paradigms. So he looked at the history of natural science and argued that it's not just an accumulation of knowledge that ends up with an answer to a problem. Science actually goes through a series of paradigm shifts or revolution. So a paradigm is simply a way of doing something or a way of understanding or looking at something. So if you think about in science, there is a particular method for finding out whether a substance is acidic or alkaline. You would do a pH test. You might use some litmus paper. It's the same procedure, and it's the same set of ideas. This can change throughout time. So when perhaps new discoveries are made, the paradigm or the way of doing that particular test might change. And so he calls this a paradigm shift. So pre-science is a period of discovery where there is no central paradigm. So there is no way of understanding that idea or concept. Then you end up with normal science, where scientists use an established paradigm, so like the theory of evolution, to support ideas. Then you have a revolutionary science where the paradigms are challenged. So a good example of this might be the idea about the world being flat. That was the agreed idea about how the world worked. Then there was revolutionary science that came about and said, well, actually, we think the world is round. And that led to a model crisis where actually people thought, maybe this is correct. Maybe actually we were wrong. When enough knowledge is accumulated to prove the new model correct, a model revolution occurs and the paradigm changes. So the way of looking at the world changes. So paradigm shifts take place when theories in normal science are challenged. So an example that happened in the last few years is the idea that the MMR jab that you have when you're a child, that was considered normal science. It was a good idea. Everyone had this jab. Then a revolutionary scientist came along and argued that actually it was wrong. It caused autism. And this challenged that paradigm of thought. That was eventually rejected, and we still have MMR jabs. But if more knowledge, if more scientists, more revolutionary scientists came about to prove Andrew Wakefield correct, it would have probably led to a paradigm shift in the way we understand that particular vaccine. So paradigm shifts are when one old way of thinking is shoved out the way of a new way of thinking. So we can say that sociology then is like a pre-science. There's no one dominant perspective. There's lots of competing theories and ideas about how the world works. You've got, functionalism, Marxism, feminism. None of these theories all, come together and agree and have one particular paradigm of looking at the world. There's lots of different paradigms or understandings of how to understand society. So it's valid to refer to sociology perhaps as a young science or a pre-science. And until it finds one singular unifying theory to understand social order, then we can't really say that it's a fully fledged science. So if you could turn to page 193, there's some information about realism, science and sociology. So read a bit more about open and closed systems, and what do they think? Where do realists fit in with the positivist, interpretivist ideas on sociology and science? So the final section is thinking about, well, is science even scientific? So this might seem a bit peculiar, but it should become clear as we go through this. So if you think about science, when we looked at those 5 key ideas, we said that it was objective. This can be challenged because scientists are humans, and ultimately they do persuade or influence the outcomes of research, even if it is in a lab setting. So firstly, if you think about scientists, they choose what topic to research. So that involves a human value judgment made about what is valuable and what isn't. Where they get their funding can affect their research. So if you're getting your funding from government, obviously you're going to want to perhaps give results to government that are in their favour. If you give them results that they don't like, they're not going to hire you again and you're unemployed. They have to operationalise key concepts and define things, and obviously, again, that is a subjective definition. They have to interpret findings. They might dismiss some findings that don't fit with a particular theory. The way they record their responses might be influenced by their own personal beliefs. Selecting appropriate questions, which is kind of like the idea about choosing topic. Selecting what findings to include in their report. Again, this all links into where they get their funding as well. I'm not going to include perhaps evidence that doesn't fit with what my funder wants. Deciding what the report will be used for. Will I publish it on a day when everyone will be reading it, or will I publish it on a bank holiday when everybody is not reading the news? Deciding where it will be published. Will I publish it in some forum where hardly anyone will access it, or will I publish it in a really public place so that everyone will read it? So science is not, completely without some sort of human involvement, and so we can't really say it's fully objective. So in this sort of example, if the government is funding my research and they're a conservative government, I might think, well, I want my research to agree with them, so I might focus on drugs that are cost effective, because conservatives often worry about the deficit, or making sure that there's not a high debt for the country, and want to perhaps cut costs and associated with austerity. So I might think about something that's cost effective rather than perhaps effective in other ways. So if you could complete the summary table, so you've got arguments to say it is a science, that it's not a science, and then is science even a science? To supplement this, I've sent you a link to the textbook, so you might want to have a read through the chapter on this topic to help you add in some more information too. Next lesson, we'll look at this in applying these ideas to exam questions. Take care. Thanks. Bye.